is the organisation is doing, because then you are going to get focus on that, that outcome, that direction.
You use the word bringing yourself to work, all of yourself to work. I want you to elaborate that one, but from a nuance of, because many organizations have their own core purpose and objectives why they exist. And some people or some groups of people who would bring their whole self, and they might have some other agendas as an individual. They might be an activist of some kind, but organizations are not activist organizations. They have a purpose, core deliverables, they have the people they serve, whereas they're not there to run either political activism of any sort. But they might be funded by taxpayers' money because they are not-for-profits, charities, and you would see that many organizations are led by some groups of people who are also doing a bit of political activism or some kind of activism, if not political. But the core objective of the organization is very different, to serve some other people, but everybody gets into the sway of, and then one would have wondered that, that's taxpayers' money being used to run a campaign or use employee productivity towards something else. So how do you see bringing yourself to work in those scenarios?
They're interesting contexts. So there's probably a couple of things. First of all, as long as humans are in a workplace, there's always going to be...
As long as humans, as in? What do you mean by that?
Well, until the day that, technology and AI does everything and we can all just, pursue our hobbies. I'm listening to Homo Deus at the moment by Yuval Noah Harari, which talks about the future like that. But as long as people are around, we're going to have multiple things driving us. That's inherently who we are. We are multi-layered, complex human beings, right? In every organisation, you have to uphold the integrity and the ethics of what that organisation stands for. So things like having your purpose defined, having your values defined, having your behaviours defined, really critical. Because if you don't have that, being able to call out the wrong thing is really hard. Leaders need to demonstrate this. They need to lead by example. So if we're seeing behaviours, even if they're not inherently terrible, if they're not aligned with the organisation, your entire staff group is not going to be aligned with the organisation. So we have to get that culture right from the top. So there's that piece. Probably what I would say is, this is why for me, recruiting for culture fit is far more important than for technical skills. And those who are in really technical roles will obviously disagree with me. That's totally fine. But I would rather someone who has a slightly lower technical skill set but is a really good cultural fit for the organisation. And when I say cultural fit, it's exactly the point that you've made. They're aligned to the purpose. They care about it. It means something to them. They have a good, strong values alignment. They believe in whatever it is the organisation is doing, because then you are going to get focus on that, that outcome, that direction. I think organisations can lose their way, individuals can lose their way, teams can lose their way, and that will happen from time to time. We see it around. I see it in the work I do, and we also see it in the newspaper sometimes. But it's about how we bring it back. How do we have the checks and balances to know why we are here? Why do we exist? How are we talking about that regularly? How are we having that conversation with our staff members? How are we linking their everyday behaviours to the core purpose of the organisation? So what we generally recommend, and what I like to talk to people about, is when we're doing performance reviews, and a lot of people eye roll about performance reviews because they're often done really terribly, right? And I get it. So a terrible performance review process isn't going to be no fun, and you're not going to want to take part in it. But a good performance review process focuses on organisational purpose, values, behaviours, and some KPIs and metrics, right? And there's discussion around not just what you're delivering, but how you're showing up every day. The attitude that you bring, the contribution. Are you an upstander, if there's poor behaviour or something? And it's about having these conversations regularly. It's not once or twice a year sitting down and going, okay, it's performance review time. I've ignored talking to you about this stuff all year and now we're going to talk about it. It's about continuous communication. It's about the manager building enough rapport with their team member that they can give them feedback on a regular basis, creating a safe feedback culture. There was an article by Professor Gary Martin from AIM this week that he talked about bubble wrapping employees. We're too scared to give them feedback. And, there's talk about that Gen Z not being comfortable to give and receive feedback. But it's a muscle we all have to build. I've gone into many organisations where they're scared of giving any kind of feedback, even if it's not that serious. But you just start doing it, and it takes the sting out of it, and you do it in a supportive way. You set the context to say, I want to see you succeed. I think you've got some really great skills. You're excelling in this area, but you know what I want to work on with you is this area and this area. So let's team up and see what we can do about that. That's really different than me sitting down with you and going, you know what, Dev, you're not performing in this area. Of course, if you've left it and things have gotten really bad, you'll have to have that conversation. But you can avoid doing that if you're proactive and you work with a person. Most people are inherently good and want to do the right thing. There's a few bad apples, but for the most part, most people want to come on that journey, but they're not getting the right feedback, guidance, and support from their managers. Manager avoids it because they're too scared to have a conversation, and then it becomes a big issue. And then we get a phone call and go, hey, Sam, can you help us deal with a people issue, right? So what I encourage anyone who has a team members, communicate regularly, give regular bits of feedback, give plenty of positive feedback. When they're killing it, tell them they're killing it. High fives all round. So then when you have to go, but you know what I didn't love? I didn't love this part of the thing. They go, oh, okay, and it doesn't sting in the same way. Whereas if you haven't said anything for 6 months and then it's a big deal, of course they're going to react poorly. So feedback culture.